Sylvia rides again.
National Cycle Route 5. Penmaen Bach Point. Cyclists at risk of harm. National Cycle Route 5, between Conwy and Penmaen Bach, is the only route available for cyclists in transit along the North Wales coast. The only alternative is a long and arduous diversion inland over the Cyclists Pass, with steep gradients that can be too challenging for some riders. As well as local shorter rides, NCR 5 is a popular and vital link for many cyclists transiting longer distances along the coast from as far afield as Carnarvon, Bangor, Anglesey in the west, and Llandudno, Colwyn Bay, Rhyl in the east. In two places, around the very narrow difficult headland, NCR 5 runs in immediate proximity to the eastbound A55 dual carriageway. At these sections there is an increasing incidence of motor vehicle collisions, sadly with at least 2 separate driver fatalities, which also placed NCR 5 users at serious risk. This video highlights the following issues at this hazardous location. The day-to-day risks that users of NCR 5 routinely face, particularly pertaining to motor vehicle collision and unsafe infrastructure. The decision accountability and hazard consequence to NCR 5 users during path closures, sometimes long-term, including risks to cyclists at such times, exacerbated by poor unsafe decision-making, and inappropriately located temporary barriers and signage. The eastbound carriageway of the A55 Expressway originates from when the old Telford Coach Road was replaced during the construction of a tunnel in 1932. Originally a bidirectional highway, it is still characterized by narrow, cliff-hugging sharp curves. In 1989 it became the 2-lane eastbound carriageway after a new tunnel was constructed for westward traffic. Traveling west on NCR 5, cyclists have to negotiate 2 blind bends over narrow bridges. The bridges exit to where NCR 5 is squeezed, even narrower, between the A55 crash barrier on one side and a relatively low concrete parapet, behind which there is a long vertical drop to the seashore below. Initially, there is a short but substantial 3-beam crash barrier protecting NCR 5 users, but this changes to a low and far less substantial construction for the full distance around winding bends, as far as the tunnel portal. Cars, vans, and trucks speed past at barely an arm's length away. Cyclists have to contend with the hazard of barrier posts, where one misjudgment can potentially throw a rider over the low barricade into the path of traffic. Likewise, hampered by expressway infrastructure that needlessly obstructs the path while being buffeted by the strong winds common at this location. All the way to the east end of the tunnel portal, there is barely sufficient room to pass others traveling in the opposite direction. Trikes, bikes with trailers, have to take extreme care passing obstacles, as the space available is so narrow. Just before the east tunnel portal, NCR 5 follows the route of the old Telford Coach Road, but not before an unnecessary tight bend and narrow gap. Around the headland the path is wide, and unlike elsewhere, has railings above the stone wall, protecting travelers from the precipitous drop down to the sea. Once beyond the western portal of the tunnel, NCR 5 has no protection whatsoever from streams of vehicles traveling on the narrow and bendy expressway. A short way further on, there are aluminium railings, but these only provide scant protection to cyclists and walkers. It's a few meters from this location, where a driver most recently, sadly lost his life, by crashing through the lightweight fence, and across NCR 5, to demolish the sea wall protecting the precipice down to the seashore. Ride with me now, and experience what it is like, with traffic whizzing past, and make a note of the number of temporary repairs after vehicles have breached the railings in recent months. Now accompany me in the other direction. I'm riding a relatively wide tricycle. It has a width typical of a bike with a kiddie trailer, a child's pushchair or somebody riding a mobility scooter. Note how difficult it is to pass a succession of thoughtlessly located infrastructure, and in particular the close hazard of fast-moving trucks and other vehicles. Likewise how oncoming cyclists are forced to lean over the low crash barrier, potentially in the path of an oncoming vehicle. Trapped between a high rock face and a precipitous drop, the widths of both NCR 5 and the Expressway are well below national standards, but little can be done in this respect, without major and costly improvements. Notwithstanding the legacy of the route engineered almost a century ago, the A55 facilitates the second busiest passenger ferry terminal in the UK, with heavy trucks travelling through 24/7. In summer, there are streams of nose-to-tail holiday traffic all filtering along the tight narrow bends of the Headland. The current protection for NCR 5 users is demonstrably unsafe. To the west, the single-beam crash barrier is too low and structurally inadequate to protect path users. Designed to retain an out-of-control vehicle and absorb some of the energy of a collision, such barriers need to bend, deform, and not break apart. The evidence from a recent collision, which was by no means the first, and not the most recent, singularly illustrates the potential fate awaiting any unlucky walker or cyclist. It's just a lottery before someone is crushed between barrier and sea wall, when the next inevitable crash happens. On the east side of the tunnel, NCR 5 is again narrow and uncomfortably close to the A55 carriageway. Immediately beyond the portal, there is no protection for path users. Further on, there is no crash barrier, other than lightweight aluminium railings. During accidents over the last months, they have been breached in a number of locations. In the most recent fatality, sadly involving a car driver, the vehicle penetrated through the barrier, across NCR 5, and then on to demolish the stone wall guarding the precipice above the seashore. Based on recent accidents, it is clear that the barrier provision is unfit for purpose. Unlike a crash barrier, the aluminium railings have a propensity to break apart or disintegrate on impact. Although they may provide protection from a slow-moving light vehicle, they obviously fail in a high-speed impact, or potentially, when hit by a slower large commercial vehicle. Images from the accident locations also show that the railings have a tendency to break away in large sections, which in itself can be a hazard to cyclists and walkers. A section of airborne fence can easily have the capacity to maim or kill. On the west section of NCR 5, when designing the bridges and abutments, engineers did have the foresight to locate potential obstacles such as lampposts up on the wide parapet, out of harm's way. Since then, there has been a prevailing laissez-faire approach by their successors, with respect to user protection, as the route is now littered with obstacles. Hazards like these would never be allowed to impede any other sort of highway. But because it is a cycleway, the risks are just ignored, particularly if adorned with hazard tape. On a route already too narrow and clearly unsafe, these obstructions could easily have been located safely with the application of some basic engineering. One can only speculate about who, if any, has carried out a proper risk analysis along this route. If they have, clearly, that person lacked a modicum of experience with respect to the dynamics of all types of pedal cycle, likewise the vulnerabilities of riders, particularly those who are disabled. Quite rightly, in the event of a major incident, both A55 and NCR 5 may need to be closed. In the latest tragic event, the immediate priority was to make the breach in the seawall safe, and to get the traffic flowing along both of the eastbound carriageways. There was no such consideration apportioned to NCR 5 users, despite it being the only available route transiting the North Wales coast. The path remained closed for over 2 weeks, trapping unsuspecting users at dead ends, preventing them from reaching their intended destination, either for work, recreation, or simply trying to get home. The closure was done on the pretext of safety, apparently due to some missing railings at the accident site, even though the route was usable as normal. The logic of this decision defies our understanding, given that unrepaired breaches in the railings had been in existence for months. Likewise, it is clear to us that no account was taken on the consequences to those trapped by the closure, particularly to the very real danger to those trying to find an alternative bypass. We have been forwarded the following communication, which was sent to the authorities by a retired police accident investigator. He sums up the failings succinctly.
Today, I rode a section of the N5 cycle path, between Penmaen Bach and Conwy Morfa. I rode past some traffic cones, and discarded signs, on the verge on approach to the tunnels. Just prior to the tunnel, I noticed 2 sections of railings had been taped off, and small sections removed. It wasn't until I approached the pedestrian bridge, on the other side of the tunnel, did I realize the path had been closed. I am somewhat at a loss as to why the path has been closed, as it was negotiable throughout its entire length. I assume the path closure is due to the small section of railings which are missing. Can you explain to me why there is no diversion for cyclists in this vicinity, as I understand the closure is as a result of a collision last Saturday? It would be interesting to see how you have risk assessed this closure. How anyone can think cyclists, using the A55, is a credible alternative than the cycle path in its current state, is beyond me. It is rideable without any obstruction. Perhaps you can enlighten me as to your rationale for the closure? From a different perspective, if a cyclist is killed, or seriously injured using the A55, you may well have to justify the cycle path closure in a court of law. It is the main route for cyclists and pedestrians using the North Wales coastal path. As a retired police officer, who spent years investigating fatal and serious collisions, I can assure you the mechanics of a collision are only a small aspect of the investigation. If a cyclist is killed on the A55, whilst this path is closed, serious questions will be asked as to why it has been closed. From my perspective, you will be unable to justify the closure of this path. The risks to cyclists using the A55 are far greater than a damaged fence, which I feel is totally inadequate in its current format, as it provides little protection to users of the path. Previous collisions should have evidenced its lack of suitability as a credible barrier.
Many non-cyclists, as well as those in charge, may have considered the closure of NCR 5 to be of little consequence. However, it was a major issue fraught with risk for cyclists, finding themselves at an unexpected dead end, trapped the wrong side from home or their destination. With alternatives fraught with jeopardy, by either cycling along the A55 or opting for a long and challenging inland diversion, most chose to ignore the barriers and continue along NCR 5, despite the supposed risk that had been considered greater than normal. In recent closures, hazard to cyclists was exacerbated by inaction and apparent indifference by the authorities concerned. They provided no information on a possible diversion, largely because there wasn't an easy option, and placed barriers only at locations that caused the greatest inconvenience and potential risk. For cyclists riding west, a barrier was placed at a dead end without exit, close to the Headland, which imposed a backtrack for miles. Bizarrely, the only warning sign at the beach car park disappeared days before the path was reopened. For the few that chose not to illegally bypass the barrier, there was only one alternative, as cyclists are banned through the A55 westbound tunnel. The route over the Sucknant Pass is long and arduous, and can be particularly risky on short winter days. Unsuspecting westward travelers also encountered a barrier near the tunnel portal, with only an exit directly onto the expressway. All path users faced the same dilemma: either carry on regardless, risk life or limb on the busy A55, or retreat a long way back to Penmaen Bach and divert over the pass. Days later, the authorities demonstrated their usual lamentable regard for the principles of active travel by relocating the barrier, with an expectation that path users would be able to negotiate multiple flights of steep steps, then self-find a route over the pass. Those that did divert faced an exceptionally long, arduous slog to convoy over the pass. How many vehicle crashes have there been in the last few years? We don't know, so can only guess, based on the frequency of each instance of damage spotted while cycling past. We have, however, been made aware of the following Freedom of Information request.
Under Freedom of Information Act, Environmental Information Regulations, I would like to request the following information. 1. Referring to the attached satellite image, as outlined in red, the number of instances over the last 3 years, where the crash barrier, separating NCR 5, and the eastbound A55 carriageway, has sustained damage due to vehicular collision. This area is immediately east of the old Penmaen Bach tunnel portal. 2. Referring to the attached satellite image, as outlined in yellow, the number of instances, over the last 3 years, where the aluminium railings, separating NCR 5, from the eastbound A55 carriageway, have sustained damage, or have been breached, due to vehicular collision. This area is immediately west of the old Penmaen Bach tunnel portal. 3. In both the above requests, it would be appreciated that the approximate date of each event be included in order to analyze trends.
Once a copy of the response is available, we'll publish the contents in the comments section of this video. From a path user's perspective, there does seem to be an increasing succession of A55 accidents, resulting in NCR 5 disruption and barrier repair. It is the narrowness and bends of the A55 roadway that dictates the current speed limit of just 30 miles per hour around the headland. Since the last fatal accident, there is also a temporary 50 miles per hour limit on the eastbound approach to the tunnel, starting at the Puffin roundabout. Unfortunately, as motorists on occasion ourselves, we invariably witness a succession of drivers who routinely ignore both speed restrictions. The following video clip was recorded from a crowded number 5 bus. As the bus is passing the site of the recent fatal accident, note the pace of an overtaking car. We've already stated that from our experience of the last couple of years, we consider that further motor vehicle collisions are inevitable at this location. It is only by chance that while working on the final edits of this video on the 11th of December, that we received a news feed that both eastbound carriageways were closed again, due to an accident with ambulance in attendance. In conclusion, it is obvious to us that the constant cycle of repairing the barriers and railings is ineffective, as they are unfit for purpose. While provision of better protection for NCR 5 users is an imperative, such upgrades will do little to mitigate high levels of motor vehicle collisions along this section of the expressway. Short of a major long-term and costly road widening project, accidents are inevitable, unless urgent positive action is taken to curtail excessive speeding. During times of essential path closure, the current woeful consideration given to those as defined under the Highway Code as most vulnerable can only be deplored. Those involved should heed the warnings received from an experienced police investigator, or risk justifying their inaction before a coroner.
A Grim Reaper, production. Challenging those who create cycle infrastructure that is unfit for purpose, and who ignore the imperatives of every path user, including those most vulnerable or disabled.